There are many parts of the Bible that are very difficult to understand from our human perspective. For example, how did Noah get two of every creature to the ark at the right time, without there being a deadly stampede and the two snails that were making slow progress towards the ark not being crushed under hoof? Or how did the Red Sea part and the Israelites walk through on dry ground? What happened to Jonah in the stormy sea? And how did the walls of Jericho fall down at the sound of praise and worship music? How did the virgin birth occur? Friends, these are all events that are hard for us to get our heads around. But that doesn't mean they're not true. But there is something else, another event that takes some getting our heads around. Something that is a key to so much that we read in the Bible. If you can accept this thing, then everything else becomes possible. The thing I'm talking about is the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection, a definition of what a resurrection is an act of bringing something that had disappeared or ended back into use or existence. Mel and I had the fortune of being brought up in Cambridge, and Queen's College in Cambridge has got an incredible bridge. It's called the Mathematical Bridge. And there are lots of stories and myths about this bridge, which are probably not true, but I like them. One is that the bridge was designed by Sir Isaac Newton. Another story about the bridge is that it was put together originally without any nuts and bolts. It was just lengths of timber that were particularly worked out to fit together to provide a sturdy bridge. And the other story that I like is how some years ago some students were inquisitive, wanting to find out how this bridge actually stood up. So they took it to bits, and then when they went to put it back together again, they couldn't do it without the use of nuts and bolts. I don't know if any of that about the bridge is true, but I do know that it's there. And I do know that you can test it out if you want. You just pay a £3.50 for a ticket and you can walk over the Mathematical Bridge and see if it's sturdy or not. However, what I do know is that when it comes to living the Christian life, if you remove Jesus' resurrection, everything else collapses. Everything else breaks down. And if you remove the resurrection of Christ, it doesn't matter how many nuts and bolts or brackets or supports that you have, everything else cannot hold together. The Christian faith collapses. There are verses in the Bible that talk about Jesus being our cornerstone. Hebrews chapter 1 says it is Jesus who holds all things together. Colossians 1 says in him he upholds everything. Later on it says Christ in you, the hope of glory. In other words, if you take Christ out, you have no hope of glory. I wonder what holds you together when you're full of fear. What or who helps you when you're overwhelmed by guilt? What holds you together when the pain just seems to be getting worse? How do you cope when you're facing significant loss? What is at your core? when you are tormented by doubts, or when nothing seems to make sense. Friends, I'm not qualified to construct, design a mathematical bridge, but I do know that Jesus is the key bridge that is missing from so many people's lives. Similarly, I don't know exactly where heaven is or precisely what life will be like when we are there, but I do understand that I need Jesus in order to get there. For it was Jesus who said, "No one comes to the Father except through me." Friends, the more we know, like those students who took the bridge to bits, the more superior we feel and the less that we believe. Our desire as a human race is to know how everything works, how things came together in the beginning, how things exist from day to day. We try to explain everything, but it is ruining our sense of mystery. For some people, the loss of mystery has led to a loss of majesty. It's interesting that the more we discover about something, the more we should be in awe and be led to worship. A great friend of Mel's is going for some open heart surgery this week. And Mel was talking to her on the phone, and she was talking about this valve that's got to be replaced in her heart. She said there are 3 types of valve they use now, or they could use now. One is a natural valve, one is a mechanical valve, and one is a new discovery, a synthetic valve. Friends, when you think about the operation that is going to be performed on Mel's friend this week, surely that surgeon who performs this procedure, surely they should be led to worship when they see how the body is put together and how it works. Who has more reason to worship than the astronomer looking up at the stars in the sky? Who has more reason to worship than the midwife who assists in a new birth? Friends, leave room in your life for the otherness of God, because it is that that leads us into worship. Friends, you didn't get a say as to when your life on this earth started, but you do get to decide on what happens when your life here is finished. You get to choose what happens next. Paul made the connection. He said we are all born of Adam. In other words, when we are born, we're all under the judgment of sin. And the result of sin is, in the end, physical death. So Paul was saying sin came into the world through one man, Adam, and it leads to death. New life came into the world through one man, Jesus. And because of his resurrection, we can choose to take on the new life that he is offering to us. Friends, Jesus is the key to this new life. We read about Lazarus, and maybe you're sort of thinking, well, that's a hard thing to get our heads around. Surely Jesus could have chosen an easier way to show his power over the death that Adam brought and the new life that he is offering to us. At least Jesus could have started with a breathing person, not a dead corpse. And Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, came to Jesus and said, but what you're saying is impossible. Surely it's too difficult. He's been dead for 4 days. He's been in a tomb for 4 days. Surely it's never happened before. Surely you've got your timing all wrong, Jesus. If you'd have been here 4 days ago, maybe, but not now. He's been dead 4 days. Friends, don't you and I also come up with excuses, reasons at times when God's promises, like the new life beyond death, seem too difficult to understand and maybe too good to be true? Just want you to notice what happened when Lazarus was called by Jesus to come out of the tomb. It says in John 11, the dead man came out. His hands and feet were bound in grave clothes. His head was wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Friends, as a man, Lazarus was still bound by death. He was still going to die at the end of his life again. But notice something different about when Jesus was raised to new life. It says in John 20, Simon Peter arrived at Jesus' tomb and he noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. In other words, the new life that Jesus had was no longer bound by death. It is offering new life, and Jesus was the first to be raised to resurrection life. So Paul makes the point in verse 32 that there are two options open for us about life. One option is, if this is all there is, then Paul says just eat, drink and be merry, because if this is all there is, folks, you may as well enjoy it. Or, Paul says, you can take the risk that a brand new life, the resurrection life, the life without the bindings of death, is available to each and every one of us. So the choice is ours. Are we going to live as those with no hope beyond this life? Or will we depend on the key person whose own resurrection holds the key to eternal life? The one person who was the bridge to the promises of God. Friends, which bridge are you going to take? Test out the claims that Jesus makes. He is the bridge to get us over to heaven, to a place where God is offering us new life. And Jesus, as this bridge, won't even charge you £3.50 that you have to fork out if you want to test out the mathematical bridge to see if it will hold together. This bridge that Jesus offers is sturdy, it is unmovable, it will hold together. And yes, there were nails that were used on this bridge. They went through Jesus' hand and they went through Jesus' feet. But the empty tomb, the resurrection of Jesus, means there is more, new life to come for those who trust in him and walk across that very bridge. Next week, we're going to look at what we know, what we think we can pick up from the Bible about what it will be like to live in heaven. I look forward to sharing that with you next week. Take care and God bless.